She stood in the middle of my parents' dining room, holding my diary above her head like a trophy, and she said, "Everyone needs to hear what your daughter's been hiding. My name is Claire." I was 26 years old, and in the next 90 seconds, my sister was about to destroy 10 years of my life in front of everyone I loved. But here's what she didn't know. She didn't know I'd added one more page to that diary the night before. A page she never got to. A page that was about to end her marriage. Not mine. If you've ever had someone you trusted turn your own words into a weapon, stay with me, because this story doesn't end the way she thought it would. Growing up, my sister Renee was 3 years older than me, and from the very beginning, our roles in the family were assigned like parts in a play nobody asked us to audition for. Renee was the golden child, homecoming queen, straight A's, the daughter my mother bragged about at church, at the grocery store, at every family gathering for as long as I could remember. I was the quiet one, the one who kept to herself, the one who wrote in a diary every single night since I was 14 years old. Because a diary doesn't interrupt you, doesn't compare you to your sister, and doesn't repeat what you say to anyone, that diary became the one place I could be honest. Not the polished, agreeable version of myself I performed at family dinners. The real one. I wrote about my anxiety. I wrote about the years I struggled with an eating disorder in college that I never told my parents about, because I was terrified of being seen as the difficult one on top of everything else. I wrote about the miscarriage I had at 23, 3 months into my first serious relationship. A loss I never told a single member of my family about because I couldn't handle another reason for them to look at me with pity instead of pride. And I wrote about my marriage, about Daniel, my husband of 2 years, and the slow, creeping doubt I'd started to feel that something in our relationship wasn't right. Not abuse, not anything dramatic, just a feeling, a gut instinct that told me to pay attention. I never told anyone about that feeling. Not my best friend, not a therapist, just my diary. Which is why, when Renee stood in my parents' dining room holding that diary above her head, I felt something inside me go completely still, because everything I had never said out loud for 10 years was written in that book, and she was about to read it to a room full of people. Let me back up 2 weeks, because the betrayal didn't start in that dining room. It started earlier, and it started with trust. My parents were hosting a family reunion, the kind with cousins flying in from 3 states, a rented lake house, for days of forced togetherness. I brought the diary with me because I always did. Old habit. It felt safer in my bag than left behind in an empty house. On the second night, I couldn't sleep, so I went for a walk along the dock. I left my bag in the bedroom I was sharing with Renee. I was gone maybe 20 minutes. When I came back, nothing looked disturbed. My bag was zipped the way I'd left it. Nothing seemed out of place. I had no reason to think anything had happened, but Renee had found the diary tucked in the inside pocket. And in those 20 minutes, she didn't just glance at a page. She read it, cover to cover, front to back. Everything I had written for the past 4 years, my eating disorder, my miscarriage, my doubts about Daniel. She took pictures of the pages with her phone. I didn't know any of this yet. I spent the rest of that reunion laughing at bonfires with my cousins, completely unaware that my sister was sitting on the most private parts of my life like a loaded weapon, waiting for the right moment to use it. And 2 weeks later, at a Sunday dinner meant to celebrate our grandmother's 80th birthday, she found it. There were 14 people in that dining room. My parents, my grandmother, 3 aunts, cousins, Daniel, sitting beside me, having no idea what was about to happen to either of us. Renee stood up in the middle of dessert, and at first I thought she was going to give a toast for Grandma. Instead, she pulled out her phone, and then, almost theatrically, she pulled the diary itself out of her bag. I think it's time this family stopped pretending everything's fine, she said. Because Claire's been lying to all of us for years. My stomach dropped through the floor. She started reading, not paraphrasing, reading, word for word, from photographed pages of my handwriting, projected off her phone onto the family group chat she'd created an hour earlier so relatives who weren't even at the dinner could follow along in real time. She read about my eating disorder in front of my mother, who started crying immediately, not out of concern, but out of what I can only describe as embarrassment, asking why I never told her, as if the sharing itself was the injury rather than the years of silent shame that led to it. She read about my miscarriage, out loud, in front of Daniel, who had never heard about it either, because it happened before we were together, and I had genuinely never found the right time or the right level of safety to bring it up. And then she read the part about my doubts, my private, half-formed, still working through it doubts about my marriage, in front of my husband, in front of his entire extended family, because 2 of his cousins happened to be there too. The table went silent. Then it didn't, and started asking questions. My mother kept repeating, "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me?" Like a scratched record, completely missing the point that the answer was standing 3 feet away from her, holding my diary like a prize she'd won. Daniel didn't say anything. He just looked at me, and I watched something in his face close like a door. Renee sat back down, satisfied, like she'd just performed some kind of public service, like exposing me was an act of family loyalty rather than the single most violating thing anyone had ever done to me. "I just think secrets destroy families," she said, looking directly at me. "I did this because I love you. I want you to remember that line, because it's going to matter a lot more in about 10 minutes. I left that dinner without saying a word. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too hard to hold a fork, let alone form a sentence that could undo what had just happened in front of 14 people who would all remember it for the rest of their lives. Daniel drove us home in silence. When we got inside, he finally asked the only question that mattered to him. "Were you going to leave me?" And the honest answer was, "I didn't know." That was the whole point of a diary. It was where I was allowed to not know yet. It was where thoughts got to exist before they became decisions. Renee had taken something unfinished and forced it into the world as if it were final. The next few days were brutal. My mother called, not to apologize, but to ask why I'd kept so much from her, as if the confession itself, forced out of me against my will, was somehow evidence that I was the one who had done something wrong. And I hadn't spoken to in months suddenly had opinions about my marriage, my mental health, My grief over a pregnancy loss they had no right to even know about, let alone discuss over group texts with emoji reactions. And Renee texted me 2 days later like nothing had happened. Hope you're doing okay after dinner, lol. Love you, sis. That was when something shifted in me. Not into rage, into clarity. Because here's the thing about people who violate your privacy and then act baffled by your hurt, they're not actually confused. They know exactly what they did. What they're testing is whether you'll let them get away with it without consequence. Renee had spent 30 years being protected by the family narrative that she was the good one, the responsible one, the one who could do no wrong. She read my diary and used it as a weapon because on some level she believed the golden child label made her untouchable. That whatever she did to me would always be forgiven because I was the difficult one and she was the favorite. She had made one mistake in that entire calculation. She assumed the diary ended where she stopped reading. Here's what Renee didn't know, and what none of my family knew either. That night at the dinner table, 3 weeks before the family reunion, Renee's husband Marcus had reached out to me privately. Not for anything scandalous at first. He said he was worried about their marriage, that Renee had been distant, secretive with her phone, spending unexplained hours at the gym that never seemed to match her workout clothes when she came home. He didn't want to accuse her of anything. He just wanted to know if she'd said anything to me. Since we were sisters, since maybe she'd confided in me the way sisters are supposed to, I told him the truth. She hadn't said a word to me about any of it. But something about the conversation stuck with me. So a few days later, out of nothing but instinct, I did something I'm not proud of, but I also don't regret. I looked through the shared family cloud photo album, the one all of us dumped vacation photos into, and I found a set of screenshots Renee had accidentally auto-uploaded from her phone. A string of messages between her and a man named Chris, someone from her office. Someone whose name I recognized because she'd complained about him constantly at family dinners, calling him the most annoying guy in the building. The messages weren't ambiguous. They were exactly what Marcus feared. I didn't know what to do with that information. I wasn't going to blow up my sister's marriage over screenshots I'd stumbled onto by accident, especially not without more context, more certainty. More time to think it through. So I did what I always do when I don't know what to do yet. I wrote it down. The night before the reunion, I added one final entry to my diary, the very last page documenting exactly what Marcus had told me, exactly what I'd found in that shared album, and my own uncertainty about whether to say anything at all. I wrote, I don't know if this is my secret to tell, but if it ever comes down to loyalty, I need to remember I found this first. Before I decide what kind of sister I want to be. That page was written in the same notebook. Just a few pages after everything Renee read out loud at that dinner table. She read my eating disorder. She read my miscarriage. She read my doubts about Daniel. She stopped 4 pages short of her own husband's affair, documented in my handwriting. Sitting in the same book she waved above her head like a trophy. She never got to the last page. I spent a week deciding what to do with what I knew. Renee had made her choice at that dinner table. She decided family secrets were fair game. That privacy meant nothing if it served her narrative. That exposure was an act of love as long as she was the one doing the exposing. So I decided to let her live by her own rule. I didn't call a family meeting. I didn't stage a dramatic dinner table reading of my own. I did something quieter, and honestly, something I think was more effective. Because it didn't need an audience to work, it just needed to reach one person. I sent Marcus copies of the screenshots, along with the date I'd found them, and told him honestly that I'd struggled with whether it was my place to say anything, but that after what happened at dinner, I no longer felt obligated to protect a secret that wasn't mine to protect either. I want to be clear about something here, because this matters. I didn't do this out of revenge. I genuinely believe that. I did it because Marcus deserved the truth about his own marriage, and because Renee had personally, forcefully, publicly established a family's new rule. Secrets don't matter. Exposure is love, honesty above comfort. No matter who it hurts. I was simply the first person in the family to actually live by the rule she wrote. Marcus confronted her 2 days later. She denied it at first, the way people always do, until he showed her the exact messages, time-stamped, undeniable. She admitted to an affair that had been going on for 5 months, and when she asked him, through tears, how he'd found out, he told her the truth. Her own sister had known for weeks, long before the dinner, long before the diary reading, long before she'd stood in that dining room and called honesty a family value. Word travels fast in families like mine, and within a week, everyone knew. Renee's marriage was ending. Marcus had moved out. And the same relatives who had spent days interrogating me about my private struggles suddenly had nothing to say at all. My mother called me, and for the first time since the dinner, she didn't ask why I hadn't told her something. She asked quietly, "Did you know? Before the dinner? Did you know about Chris?" And I told her the truth. Yes, I'd known. I'd written it down because I didn't know what else to do with it yet. I hadn't decided whether it was my place to say anything. "So why didn't you say something sooner?" she asked. "Because I understood something Renee never did." I told her that not every private thing you know about someone is yours to use. I was still deciding whether I had the right to tell that story. Renee never asked herself that question about mine. She just took it. My mother didn't have a response to that. For the first time in my entire life, I watched her sit with the discomfort of not immediately defending her golden child, and it was the strangest, most validating silence I have ever experienced. Renee reached out to me exactly once after everything came out. Not to apologize for the diary, not even to acknowledge it, really. Just to ask bitterly how I could do that to her. I told her the truth. I didn't do anything to her. I simply stopped protecting a secret in a family that had just taught me explicitly, publicly, at a dinner table in front of 14 people, that secrets don't get protected here anymore. She wrote that rule. I just followed it. It's been 8 months since that dinner. Renee and Marcus are divorced. My relationship with her is, at best, distant, a handful of stiff texts around holidays. Nothing close to what we had before, though if I'm honest, I'm not sure what we had before was ever real closeness. Maybe it was just proximity dressed up as intimacy. Daniel and I are still together. That dinner forced a conversation we probably should have had on our own terms. in our own time, but forced honesty, even ugly and involuntary, turned out to be something we could rebuild from. We're in therapy now, not because the diary broke us, but because it turned out the doubts I'd written down were worth examining honestly instead of burying. And we're doing that work together now, on our terms, not Renee's. My mother and I talk more now than we did before, strangely enough. I think some part of her finally understood, watching her golden child's life fall apart from a wound she inflicted on herself, that being the difficult daughter was never actually about being difficult. It was about being honest in a family that had never made room for honesty unless it served someone else's image. I still keep a diary. I write in it every night, the same as I have since I was 14. But I keep it somewhere no one else will ever find it now. Not out of fear, out of respect for myself, and for the simple, obvious truth that some things are allowed to exist before they're ready to be shared. That not every private thought is a secret waiting to be exposed for someone else's benefit. Renee thought she'd found my ending that night at the dinner table. She just never got to the last page.
If this story hit close to home, if you've ever had someone you trusted turn your private words against you, let me know in the comments, because I have a feeling I'm not the only one who kept the real ending for last. Subscribe for more stories like this one, because next week I'm telling you about the mother-in-law who thought she controlled everything in her son's marriage until she found out whose name was actually on the deed to her own house.